much. Hey, internet people. On the Slater Spotlight session, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Corey Moen. Corey, how the hell are you?
I'm good, y'all. Hello. Stoked to be here. Yeah, just, post-conf vibes for sure on the Webflow side of things. So yeah, getting my energy back and back into projects and all that. But yeah, stoked to be here.
Yeah, and you've had a very intense pre-conf, I imagine. I know the whole of Webflow has getting everything prepared, but you have been particularly involved in the website, which is obviously what we're here to talk about today.
Yep.
And if anyone has any questions, we've got Corey as in Flowman Runnels in the chat. We've got Derek, we've got Andrea Morgan, and yeah, Corey has noticed the No Code Supply hat and Slater hoodie. Why don't we do a little plug before we get into this? Is the merch for sale, or what's happening with that?
Oh, yo, it's close. Candidly, like this is like a test run of some stuff, and I have a few other things Max, Lind, and I have been working on for No Code Supply Co. merch, and it's like all queued up on the site and everything. I just need to like finish some landing pages and get it launched. I try to do a lot of that over the summer. And then comp stuff hit and other freelance projects and all that. So it just like, one thing at a time. I try to not pressure it too hard, So hopefully by the end of the year though, regardless, we'll have some stuff. I think there's like a MAST tee. There's some NCSC specific stuff. It's all just for fun, really. So yeah.
But I would say though that you are fully prepared for this stream with a double whammy, all the gear and some idea, I may say. For anyone that didn't get that joke, that was meant to be funny. It was meant to be all the gear, no idea, but I changed it. I'm hilarious. Had too much coffee this afternoon. So we've got merch to drop, even though it's just for fun. If anyone wants some merch, let's get some comments going. I'm sure if you pay Corey by PayPal, double the price, but I'm sure he'll send it out extra fast to you.
Honestly, maybe we'll have some beta users too of like, hey, make sure checkout works and all that, and you can just have it for free.
Hey, if you're doing live streams, you're in with a shout. So make sure that you show off all the ways that you're using MAST. Maybe using the No Code Supply snippets, user-generated content goes a long way. I happen to know. So we've also got Darren Gonzalez in the chat. Thought it was a great spin on a classic phrase. He's noticing my banter. Thank you. We're not here for me to spout random, terrible jokes, though. We're here to get into the nuts and bolts of how the Webflow Conf website came to exist. We had 4 cities, 2 continents, 1 conference, and they were all managed through one site. Now, interestingly, Corey was sat next to me at the Chicago Webflow Conf as he was doing no-code, low-code stuff. And that's when I kind of asked him about the website. I was like, how did this all come together? And he was on Airtable and then Memberstack, and he was showing me Webflow site. And I was thinking, we got to get this man on a live stream because he pulled it all together using Slater as one of the pieces of this puzzle. So I thought it would be really fun to do a live stream just to see a bit of behind the scenes. I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Corey, and if you want to share the screen or do anything, I'll manage that. And if there's anyone that has any questions, we want this to be quite an interactive stream. We want you guys to ask questions, get involved. I definitely don't want to hear the sound of my own voice too much during this. So yeah, please do ask stuff away and I'll put it up on the screen. Cool. Corey, over to you.
Let's see if I can get screen share going here. Cool. Let me know. Can you see my screen? And hopefully
Yes, sir. We are looking at the Webflow Conf site.
Love it. So yeah, what's up, y'all? I guess quick backstory on events at Webflow and or specifically Webflow Conf and even what was before No Code Conf. We have, somebody that runs events internally, and like many companies in the past, we would run a lot of events through a custom or, bought event platform. I won't name them specifically because opinions here nor there, but in the past couple of comps, we always really want to have a lot of control over the end attendee experience with our virtual event platform. And oftentimes that is hard. A lot of the platforms that exist out there are really meant for function, and sometimes like carrying a certain brand and aesthetic through is oftentimes an afterthought. It's like the extent of it is like throw in your logo and your color, and that's about the extent of customization. Anything beyond that is a ton of custom code or something like that. And so while we've always done the marketing end of Webflow Conf or No Code Conf for it on, of course, Webflow in the past, we pitched after Conf last year, actually, and then it finally came to fruition, really starting work in May this past however long, 5 months ago. And we pitched to actually build it all ourselves, not only the front end, but, control the registration flow, forms, reporting, on-site check-in, everything ourselves using the power of no code, including Webflow and several of the tools. So, you can see the marketing site here, but there's this whole other side that hopefully most of you already experienced with registering through the site itself, and you have all the same UI and things here, and you maybe even notice the key here of Memberstack being one of the additional tools we integrated to make this happen. A quick side is that I definitely wanted to do this with native memberships. There's just a couple features that were just not quite there yet that made it really not feasible, and Memberstack, on the other hand, being fully featured and enabled in that way. So again, I'll get to definitely Slater and more of that specific use case, but I thought a lot of this context would help. So even looking at this from like a zoomed out lens, tooling and user flow perspective, which is the way that the team I'm on at Webflow, which is the brand team, but more specifically the brand web team, we always start from the end experience. Like, what is the flow we want people to go through? And then what then are the toolings and things we need to make that happen along the way? And so at a high level up here is even just those tools. So Webflow, of course, Memberstack for authentication, Whale Sync for all data syncing, both for the CMS and also member data. So all the Memberstack attendee data, getting that over into Airtable, and Airtable ultimately being our like source of truth backend for that controlled all of the CMS. So think like session content, data, sponsors, speakers, et cetera, as well as syncing all that member data in so that we could do a lot of reporting and enhanced functionality on top of it. So this was really the core meat of it at the top. And then, of course, there's always other tools that are integrated in one way, shape, or form. I candidly am definitely team do as many automations as possible directly in Airtable. When you are using Airtable in a stack, we did have some in Zapier. We use Iterable and Marketo for emails. Salesforce is, of course, a backend CRM, and Stripe if payments were needed. In this case, everything was free for Webflow Conf this year. So that definitely made it a little simpler. And so I won't go into necessarily the nit and grit of all this in terms of user flows, but in general, you can get the idea that like the way we thought about it, of people coming to the page, going to register, signing up and validating their email, and then having some kind of a flow where they select tickets, get us the information we need in order to register them, and then doing what we need to after that to send a confirmation email, track them in Salesforce, whatever the thing is, just to have that full marketing life cycle of an event, right? And this is not really unique to Webflow. This is just events in general. A fun fact is actually before I joined the team at Webflow, I was at a company for almost 7 years that did events and incentives. And so a good portion of that work was for building sites, microsites, working with registration platforms for these big and small company events. And so this was like, this whole experience was a huge like scratching an itch I've always had to do all this in Webflow and no code tools. So super fun from that lens. So going in a little deeper, looking at some of this stuff, I'm guessing most of the people here are already pretty familiar with Webflow. If you're not, quick TLDR, it's a website building platform. It's a visual development tool where you're using all the same concepts of HTML and CSS in a live canvas and then manipulating them with, CSS or classes and styles, as well as integrating, data via a custom CMS where you can have collections of data and each data has, specific fields that you define. And then the real power being that all of the CMS is also accessible via API to fully do, updates, deletes, create all that on top of it in integration with other tools like Airtable, as I mentioned. So we built all the front end in here, including, if we went to any of the registration pages where you select a ticket, this is all built right in here, just using forms in Webflow and then a little bit of custom code, thanks to Slater. A little bit further into the registration, an even bigger form. But again, you can see this is all just built in Webflow, which is so fun because then we could really get granular with all kinds of things like the success state and have it like there's a little animation that plays here in the success state that's just built with native interactions in Webflow. And so this part was really the crown jewel of controlling that user experience. That was priority number one. And then, ensuring the flow of data and all that kind of stuff worked as well. And so a big part of that, again, was Memberstack. If you aren't familiar with Memberstack, it is a authentication and member management tool that, it really was born out of the Webflow community. It can be used on really any web stack outside of Webflow, including like, I think their other side of their focus now is even just React apps using Memberstack as the full authentication management service. And so the way that we set this up is even just across the 4 locations. As Jack mentioned, we had a plan for people that are confirmed or waitlisted for each, as well as like certain use cases like RSVP, people that we knew ahead of time, we wanted to let them in for one reason or another. And so doing different things with these plans to make sure that those flows worked. What's really nice is you could customize things like redirects, logic. So in other words, logic is like, hey, if somebody gets added to the San Francisco confirmed ticket, make sure they don't any longer have any RSVP or San Francisco waitlist, that kind of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of logic that makes this really, possible and also just friendly from a build perspective, because I'm not writing code to do some of this like fundamental stuff. I'm setting it all up just in an interface and then using code to enhance on top of that. So we'll come back to Memberstack here in a moment in terms of when we get into Slater and some of the custom code.
Corey, can I just pause you just for a second? Because you are flying through this, and obviously this is all top of mind stuff because you've been thinking about this for months. But for anyone that's just looking at this for the first time, if anyone's like me, they're probably like, whoa, can we just roll back to stage 1 and just ask a few questions just to fully understand this and recap.
Totally. Love it.
So what I'm interested in is obviously you've got this really down now, this, obviously it's really well thought through and stuff. Was there something that happened at last year's conference that didn't go right that meant that this, because you're saying all this stuff like, well, this is obvious. I mean, obviously we needed Airtable and AirSync, and the sales team needed this, and the marketing team needed this, and it's like, whoa, what? How did you? I mean, you said you had experience previously working for this events company, and that's obviously given you a lot of perspective on how events work from a digital perspective. Booking systems and stuff. Like, what's wrong with Eventbrite? What went wrong with previous events that gave you this perspective, and you and the Webflow team? Can you just answer that first of all, just to give us some context?
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. It's super helpful in terms of setting that gauge. So I would say that the highest level thinking about why not use some of those tools, especially from my past experience or even just the ones we specifically use at Webflow, is like there was always this weird bridge of like you would have the marketing end of the site. You can actually still like pull up all of the past conference sites, right? So like this one, right? we spend all this time and investment into a Conf brand and experience that you experience on the web when you register, and then also when you get on site. But the breakdown that would always happen was when you went to go click, register, it would just send you over this wall to a whole new experience that, again, we would do our best to kind of brand and create a consistent experience there. But oftentimes it was a struggle to do so. An example is from this Conf in 2022, the tool we were using, myself and my coworker Mike probably wrote around 2,000 lines of custom CSS just to modify the virtual event experience. So like when we went live with Conf in 2022, we wanted to, again, have a branded, consistent experience, and just out of the box, the platform we were using, which is, again, in my experience from my past events job, this is common. It's just not intended to be super polished. It's focused on like functionality. Like, sure, somebody can submit a form and register and pay, or sure, we have polling when somebody is watching the live stream, and things like that. But the experience and how it's branded is never a first-class citizen. And so, especially thinking about last year in 2022, when we went through this one and all the effort we put in just to like make it decent, that was a big focus of it, especially on the front end. The back end was another side of this, where a lot of the tools we've used in the past they have reporting or analytics out of the box, things that like show how many people are registered for which location and are waitlisted or whatever, but like they are what they are based on what you pay. There's not a lot of customizing them on top of that. And so that was another goal. Is like, how can we do this in a way that makes it so the whole team has just way more access and way more ability to, pull a quick CSV file of all the people that fall under one specific criteria. Right. And so like that was another great example. Is like the platform we used last year to get a CSV of attendees that fit a certain filter was like, you had to request it from their team. They would manually export it. It took like hours. Whereas like doing this on Airtable, our team could all jump in here and say like, oh, I just need to get all the people that are confirmed for Chicago. Sweet. Here's the view. I can go right click, download CSV, done. Right. So it's just like that access and ease of use, as well as things like this, using Airtable interfaces to make our own form of reporting. So we could define what we want to see and how we want to see it. Again, still based within some core tooling that Airtable offers, but like this, we built all these pages ourselves and could fully control them however we wanted, right? Even an example is like one thing we built after the fact that was more of just like an idea, was, hey, wouldn't it be cool if like to help kind of drive registration or people telling their friends about it, if we had this referral workflow, right? And so we built some tooling. Again, this was actually a big one that was huge on Slater to help with some of the JavaScript that makes this happen. But we built some tooling around a way that people could refer people, and we would see that relationship of data in Airtable and then build a report or an interface like this to instantly see that we had 308 people that were referred by somebody to register to Webflow Conf, right? So it was that like flexibility and like customizability that we were really missing in the past and that we were craving to do and building ourselves. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think it's just when we, initially looked at that Figma of like the flow and stuff, I'm just like, well, hold on, cowboy. I mean, how did this all even come to pass? Because everything that you've shown us there in that Figma file makes a lot of sense, but it's just to ideate that before a conference makes me think that you've got a hell of a lot of past failures to not failures, but maybe iterations would be a better word, to actually get to this place. And it's interesting that all these different platforms, when I'm looking at this, I'm like, do you really need to have like whatever, how many different things are we looking at? Primary tools and secondary tools. There's 9 different tools. And I'm thinking, hold the phone. Surely there's an events platform that gives you that type of flexibility. But when you've got, 4 cities, you've got different languages, you've got marketing team, sales team, then you've got the people on the ground that probably need to check it on their phone. There's like all sorts of different factors that mean that it needs to be highly flexible in order for this to actually work in real time and in physical locations. Like, it's just so many factors that mean that you do need that level of customizability in order to make this work.
Oh,
So
totally.
as much as it looks more complicated, like when I'm looking at this, I'm like, surely there's a tool for this scale of organization that and the functionality needs that you need. And then also, like you talked about, the styling, actual, how does the brand identity relate to the functionality of all of this stuff? I'd imagine that there's not a tool that deals with this type of scope of event.
So ironically, there is a general, I guess, learning lesson here that I prefer, or I think about a lot anymore. That I think I'm doing a stream in a couple of weeks with another like Webflow community member on this general topic of, like, in my opinion, and using many tools over the years, even pre-Webflow, right? Like, more often than not, the tool that tries to do everything often does all those things just kind of okay. Whereas, like, if you select a combination of tools that each do one thing really well and then happen to work together, you almost have a better outcome in terms of like flexibility, quality, speed, that kind of stuff. And so, like, even when you look at these, although again, there is 9, I tried to group them up with the primary, secondary, because it, especially in one grid, it's like, whoa, really at the end of the day, Airtable and Webflow, those in my opinion were the core of like Webflow. Again, incredibly powerful, flexible front end. You can integrate code so easily to do all the things you can't even do natively. Airtable as a back end, so powerful, so scalable. All the automation, scripting, and other stuff you can do in it makes it so it's like, very flexible. And also it has this interesting balance with like complexity and functionality, and also like ease of use. Like, it's friendly enough that even people, especially collaborators on the team that need to get in and do something, don't feel overwhelmed by some like really technical, maybe more dated looking database type tool, right? So it has this really strong balance. So like, if I really had to narrow it down to the 2 priorities, it was these 2. And then, WhaleSync being the power glue between them. And then Memberstack, really, like, to be very transparent, like, Memberstack is one of a couple options. Like, Outseta is another great tool in the space that can do a lot of things Memberstack can. Again, native Webflow memberships would be amazing to use. It's just not quite there. I hope it will be one day. And so, if that's maybe another way to think about it, is like, we were prioritizing using the combination of tools that we think do each specific part of it best, and then combining them to get the best of all worlds, right?
And that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, in my opinion, especially like when it comes to events, I was working at that past company when COVID hit, and I'll just, like, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was like that whole industry exploded in uncertainty of like, oh my gosh, all of our events need to go virtual. Who's doing virtual events? All these new companies and tools came out of the woodwork claiming they did a virtual event solution. And then a lot of times that was all you could tell is just kind of duct taped together quickly after the fact. And so, when my thing was always like, when I really think about it at the core, what is, especially a virtual event, like, you just need to get somebody's information. Maybe they need to pay for a ticket, and then you just need to gate their access to viewing some content when that day comes, right? Like, beyond those fundamentals, everything else is like supplementary, right? Everything else is like nice to have or shiny, And so, to me, I've always thought about it as this like really core set of tooling, that as long as we can nail that, then from there we can be as flexible and creative as we want to be, right? Like with the referral concept, or candidly, there was a lot of other things that came up in the process of building the Conf experience. Like, for example, workshops, those weren't originally part of the plan. They were kind of an ad after we saw certain levels of engagement and things. And so the ability to then add in a separate way within the Conf site for people to register for workshops we didn't know that was coming, but thankfully the combination of tools that we selected here allowed us to pivot and adjust and create completely net new custom functionality within the existing tooling we had, because it's all meant to be open-ended and just really good at those fundamentals. You know what I mean? Yeah. So anyways.
Makes a ton of sense. Be an Italian restaurant rather than a Chinese buffet if you're a tool.
Yes.
Hearing that,
Love
definitely
that.
considering this idea as, you know, product features are requested for Slater. Just because a product feature is being requested, does that mean it should be built? Is the first question. And then if yes, when should it be built in terms of priorities? Because you know, you do, it's quite weird actually, this process of making a product, because you're trying to work out what the core user is as you have more and more different types of users.
Totally.
So it's kind of a morphing thing. But obviously, I don't want to derail you at all. This concept of using the right tool for the right purpose, rather than trying to, you know, kind of tag things or do things half-assed if there's a tool that kind of does a bit of everything.
Totally.
Makes a ton of sense. Can I just ask you, Jeff says, Corey, would you have chosen different tools if you were also taking payments for all participants?
It's a great question. So I don't think so, because candidly, when we around early June, when we made the decision to roll with Memberstack, there was already the known possibility of still having paid tickets. So we knew that, you know, we could take payments via Stripe through Memberstack. And so I don't think I would shift it too much. No. And even I'll say too, after now, I candidly before June, the last time I had used Memberstack was at that previous job. So it had been probably 4 years since I had used Memberstack. But, you know, I had used it a bit in the past. I knew that they had some like Memberstack 2.0 was like a big product shift they went through. I remember watching some content from Connor Finlayson about it. So I had trust that like there would be the flexibility there to go with it. And so, yeah, I don't think I would change it. Like I said, I think the other one that I was strongly considering was Outseta. And the main part of thinking about Outseta over Memberstack even was that there's more solutions within it. I could be less lazy and show visuals of some of this too. Outseta, not only do you have authentication, but they also have like email. So you can do all of your email automation, transactional emails, marketing emails, drip campaigns, all within the same tool, as well as within authentication, you can take payments and things like that. So there was some extra functionality with Outseta that I thought would have been really attractive. At the end of the day, like it's probably okay. It didn't work out because we already have, as I shown here, like Iterable is kind of our like our go-to email marketing platform internally. So just leveraging that instead ended up working just as well. And so again, that was even one of those things where it's like Iterable, that's all they do is email. And so, or maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm candidly not a pro with Iterable. So maybe they do more, but my main awareness of them is email. And so in that same lens of like, they do email really well because that's their primary focus, right? So there was even things in there in terms of reporting, or if people had issues with deliverability, we could track all that down pretty easily because of, you know, it's focused on that. So great question. I think if we do this all again next year, I think this stack honestly was great, even if there's payments involved. So
awesome, because that was my follow-up question. Like, you know, if there was anything you would change, what would be changed? But
yeah, I think
sounds like this is pretty solid stack.
Yeah, one tiny nuance detail that I would maybe adjust is so WhaleSync, if you aren't familiar, let's pull up their marketing site as well as a friendly visual. So WhaleSync is two-way sync, right? And so they also kind of started really in the Webflow community. I think maybe one of their first connectors was Webflow and Airtable. And you might be like, well, couldn't you just do this with Zapier or whatever? Like, you know, when I create an item or a record in Airtable, go create the same item in Webflow. Yes, you can. But what's unique about what WhaleSync is it does two-way and real time with an asterisk, right? Real time as in within seconds, you will see updates on one end be reflected on the other. And we've used this WhaleSync now, as you can see, I mean, transparently, this is our account, and we have a lot of different usage, you know, 39,000 records in sync. And so we use it across many different toolings, but the majority of it is Airtable and Webflow because of all the added functionality you get in Airtable. And so where I'm going with all of that long-winded comment is in Whale Sync, you can choose, do you want data to be synced one directional or bi-directional? And the thinking we went with the Memberstack to Webflow one that's in here right here was I wanted Memberstack to be our source of truth and have very limited control and access from other team members to that. So we made sure the data stays clean. And so it one-way synced to Airtable. So really, if you think about it, Airtable and all this attended data in here was just a read-only concept, where it was just always showing the latest stuff. Looking back, I probably would actually go the two-way sync. So that way we could have set up even more tooling, especially for things like on-site check-in. So when y'all, if you did attend an in-person event, the event team behind the table was just using these interfaces to search for people, check a checkbox, and go. And because we only did one-way sync, a lot of the check-in data remains just in Airtable. Whereas if we did two-way, even making updates to somebody's name or company, it could have been, really, really valuable to have that also instantly updated Memberstack when it's changed in Airtable. So I think that's maybe something we'll do differently next year, and then just be strict on permission control on who can access what, just to, again, make sure that the data is all legit and always clean. But yeah, that would be, I think, one thing I would tweak.
That sounds, if that's the biggest thing that went wrong for the Webflow Conf check-in, I'm just like, wow, okay, that's sounds like this is pretty well thought through. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna stop asking you questions and let you get into the flow, because I feel like I'm kind of, I've got a bazillion questions, but maybe people are like, okay, Corey, show me how this is all connected up with a little bit of custom code. So I'm going to let you crack on, right?
Love it. Yeah. So keep the questions coming. I think it's great. So yeah, we noted we have the Webflow as the front end. People authenticate through Memberstack. And so Memberstack, is you set it up by adding a script to your Webflow project, and then you use attributes and things to bind and submit data back and forth to Memberstack. For example, you can see on our form or our sign up form really here, there is specific data MS form attributes in here, which is what, ties this data and submission back to Memberstack, as well as then triggers the confirmation code email, all that kind of stuff. So it's overall very, very easy to integrate and very flexible. And then once the attendee data gets into Memberstack, Whale Sync's constantly watching for those changes and syncing that back into Airtable here. So again, we can do reporting, add functionality, run additional automations. You can see in Airtable in here, we have a whole gamut of different type of automations that do anything from cleaning up data or making data associations to, just adding people and making updates. Other things we even did in Airtable that's super powerful that you could also use Slater to help with is for scripting. So an example is, we would run a script that would go use Banner Bear, which is a separate service to generate these dynamic open graph images for speakers. Or another one was Event Hosts. I would use an Airtable script to make sure that when people upload an image of themselves as an event host for Worldwide Webflow, which is a page within the Webflow Conf site, I guess I can go to it over yonder for visual reference, right? So these were Worldwide Webflow is, a documenting and gathering of all the secondary events that happen around Webflow Conf, like meetups, watch parties, that kind of stuff. And so, again, Airtable is our backend source of truth. So all the data that is submitted comes in here, as well as all that data then gets cleaned up and synced back to the Webflow CMS. So we can do pages like this where you can see a live view of here's all the events that were created, right? And so, yeah, in Airtable, you can do things like run Airtable scripts, which can do things like compress images and things. So the way I always would do this is just as, things come in, we can just run a script that will go ahead and check all those things. I mean, we could even do one just for fun here. So photo, I'm looking at a view. I want to get event host, photo compressing, image field is photo, image size field is photo size, type. We're documenting type and size just so we know. and then error. And then you can see I can edit code. And this is just a bunch of JavaScript in here, mostly just vanilla JavaScript. There is some nuances in the way Airtable handles it. That's all documented in here. But one thing that's awesome is I've actually used Slater before to say, hey, I need to write an Airtable script to do this thing. And it can, ChatGPT, the underlying API or AI, can go reference documentation and things like that to help with creating these. And so, yeah, then what's nice is I can set that all up, point to which things I want, and then click run. And then you will see some of these records start to go away essentially as it compresses the image. And in this case, I'm also converting to WebP and doing things like that. Then they will go away out of here. And then thanks to Whale Sync, immediately those changes will be recognized in Airtable and then go update the Webflow CMS. So, I mean, transparently, you can see I missed about 30 of them here over time, but it's still a really fun use case to show the power of Airtable. So yes, that's kind of the gamut there. And then really getting now to the meat of, I think, where we probably use Slater the most. So if I go into Slater here, even just going all the way out to the way I personally use Slater is for all kinds of things, from my portfolio and personal projects to just general sandbox things, one-off things, to, you know, something like Webflow Conf, where I have 17 pages that are more formally set up for specific use cases. And one of the top use cases was working with Memberstack to do custom stuff. And something that came with Memberstack in their 2.0 update was this thing that they call the DOM or front end package. And without getting too technical, essentially what this is ways that you can send or get data from Memberstack purely with JavaScript on the front end and not needing to do like full-on API requests that require like an API key and headers and all of these like authentication concepts that, candidly, even for me, I'm like, they just stress me out and get really weird, right? And so some examples of this are like, on any given page in Webflow, I want to just have a little bit of code that goes and gets the current member that's logged in, get all their data so that I can do something with it, right? And so an example is like, you know, in our members in here, if I scroll over, you can see there's these columns, and these are all fields that we chose. So they are custom fields. You can see I can click custom fields up here. I can go add a new custom field and give it any name I want. And then now we can store data in that custom field. You can technically also do this general concept with metadata in Memberstack, but I thought this was a really nice way to do it because it's very clean and organized, and I can still read and write to it in the same way I could with metadata. And so some examples could be like, even maybe I'll actually look up myself as a better view of this. So, you know, I can search in here for all members and then find one where we can see all the specific fields, all those same custom fields outlined for this person and what values they have. So you can see when we get down here near in the bottom, there's some that are a little more, you know, not just typed in. You can tell things like this are all probably from a form submission, right? My job title, whatever, when I registered. But something like workshops, this is, you know, a string that is very specifically written because I'm actually using this to run some functionality on the front end. In this case, knowing who's registered for which workshop, and then even storing, you know, the workshop Airtable ID from that data all the way back in here, because workshops are ultimately just a type of session. And so we could associate all those things together to then know specifically who's attending workshops. You can see here's the Chicago Conf workshop, and we have a linked record. So this is just like a list of all the attendees. And I can actually click into these and see specific people and all their information that are attending this workshop. So I understand, again, I apologize if that's a little confusing in terms of what's where. I think the general sense is, again, remembering that, you know, we're syncing data from Memberstack into Airtable. So we have attendees, and then the power of it being that since we have all the other data, like what our workshops are, what our sessions are, what our speakers are, we can associate all that stuff. And as soon as you start creating those associations, those relationships to data, that's where like a lot of power comes from in terms of reporting and doing all kinds of other stuff. Even, you know, while we're here on this example, one of the other things I was doing with that relationship value was tracking a capacity. So we could actually set a value in here on, say, in Chicago, we had a capacity limit of 45 people. And then we wanted to, get a live count of the capacity and where we're at. So in other words, the actual amount counted here, there's 78 records in this field here. There's 78 people. And the difference of that is -33. And then we can sync that value back to Webflow to do something with it, like conditional visibility or whatever. A little bit of a rabbit hole there. My apologies. But hopefully that makes sense in general, this workflow of like being able to access and update data from the front end using JavaScript that Slater helps us write so that it will go change things and store things in Memberstack and then bring it back to Airtable to do stuff with, right? I'll take a breather there. I think I heard you come off mute.
Oh my God. This is a masterclass. Okay, so my tiny little brain is just like, as we flip through tabs, I'm just trying to understand what is so obvious to you and just taking a little bit of time to process. For anyone else that's feeling the same way, write it in the chat, maybe write any questions, because I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions during this stream. There is so much we're covering so fast. I think one thing that really stands out to me is the fact that Airtable is the one source of truth. And as much as we're flicking through all these other tabs, there's essentially like a lot of data that needs to be shown to various people within Webflow and various Webflowers on the front end of the site. And all of that information needs to happen or needs to move like that, right? And it's incredible to see how you're using, how you're threading all of these different tools, making sure that all these different users or personas that need to access this information and however they need to access it, see it in the right manner. It's wild, just the amount of thought that has obviously gone into all of these like from a Webflower signing up for Chicago Webflow Conf, they need this stream. This information needs to go into here. Marketing team needs to, or whoever's checking people in needs to be able to access this. Like, it's just like, oh my God, there's just so much.
It is.
So many thoughts.
It is.
And so many different parts.
I think
collide.
Yeah, an encouragement to, especially for anybody that's listening, and even in this lens of like what you're saying, this can definitely come across as overwhelming or like overly complex. But I think my encouragement or even like reminder is that like you got to just knock out one piece at a time, right? And always have this higher level view of things like this. That's why we make these user flows, is to really like always come back to like, okay, what is the core of what needs to happen? Like the absolute bare minimum. And then solve the problems for each one of these pieces along the way. Like if you think about it as an example, it's like, actually, maybe this is naturally a good transition into a more clear Slater example, right? Is I want a form where I select a ticket. We know that there's 5 ticket options online, and then all of the locations, right? So if I even go to this, right? I know that I need a form and I need to capture that data somehow and then pass it along, right? And so, I'm sorry, jumping around more. Even just looking at the user flow here, I'm going to need to get data from the select ticket page to the complete registration page so that we can submit it and then send via Zapier, in this case, the data to all the other places it needs to go for, again, tracking, reporting, and overall like, Memberstack type functionality. And so just walking through those problems one at a time has, for me, always been the way that I approach these things, is just break it down to the bare essentials and then solve problems along the way. And the greater lens to always keep in mind is the way that you're using these tools together and how you can be creative within that, right? So showing even what I'm saying as like a Slater example is like, okay, we have this form here. Now we need to know that there's some stuff we need to do. And so you can see I have some custom code in the page settings here. And in fact, you can even see there's some like commented out old custom code that's broken. Or not broken. It was really just like a different way we went about it that we ended up changing based on some learnings, right? And the thing I wanted to point out here is like, this is not a small amount of code necessarily, especially when we think about how people often use Webflow and some custom code. It's like snippets. It's like maybe throw in a library and then we're just doing some like small amounts of snippets to do things, and that's it. And really, that's not all that different here. It's just like many different snippets, right? But in general, there was things I needed to do that also were use cases I didn't initially anticipate, right? So this first amount of script, for example, and if I can actually even go in here, I think this is all right here. Yeah. So let's even look at my first prompt. Hello, can you help me update the following script? So before sending the user to the next page, we store the value of blah, 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 blah in local storage so that we can retrieve them on the next page to send to the user, right? And so I realized this is not like here's this solution to do this thing, but this is a great example of using things like the DOM package and Memberstack having some of this like core functionality available to store and retrieve data on a specific user. I knew that I could do certain things by going to Memberstack, getting some data, and then doing something. But to be very honest, like I didn't scratch write most of this. Instead, I was like, I knew I could do these fundamentals. Here, ChatGPT or Slater is an example script of doing this. Now, can you help me adjust this? And then adjust it again, and then adjust it again as I learn stuff. And so even an example of things that I learned is like the first one that's simple is like, I just need to, when you make your ticket selection, I need to save what tickets it is that you have selected, and then advance you onto that next page so that I can then submit the whole gamut of data together to all those other places, right? So again, this is kind of all happening in this part of the flow. But in the process of doing that, and then, inception. In the process of doing that, and testing it along the way, I would go make a ticket selection, go to the complete page, right? So I would go here, click continue, and then it would take me to this page. And then I would be like, oh, wait, what if I wanted to change that ticket? I want to go back. So I should have a back button. Okay. I'm going to go back to that page, but now I need to make sure that my ticket selection I made is still represented accurately here so that it's not confusing. So it's not like, oh, wait, I thought I selected online, but now it's not selected anymore. Right. So then I would come back to Slater and be like, okay, now we actually need to load the tickets, and any that they've already selected or even have in their account, I need to make sure those are all accurate, right? And I'm going to do JavaScript and the DOM package to do that. And so I hope that makes sense, at least at a high level, and especially how the workflow also of using Slater and JavaScript and AI to work from one platform to the next and make sure data and all that is moving where you need it to. And candidly, even like a part of this too, that if anybody's not as familiar with Slater, of course, to me, the most valuable part of it so far is just chatting with ChatGPT right here. It gives me suggestions in code that I can just straight up copy and paste into a code editing space, an IDE like this. That way I can read it, make adjustments if I need to, or at least have a place I can copy and paste. But the real power is while you're developing it, you can actually click this little script button down here in the corner and then copy this script that it generates for you, put it on the page where you will be making changes. So you would go to like the page in Webflow, page settings, and then paste that script right in here. So you can even see if I was to do it. I'm not going to actually save it. But all this is really doing is creating a script tag specific to that page in Slater. And then the beauty of this is that a lot of times in Webflow, if I was making a code change, I would have to make it in here and then save and then go publish the site. And that workflow is very time consuming and very clumsy. And it's also very risky because you could be like publishing another content on some other page somebody else is working on, right? And so instead with Slater, once you put that root script in here like this, I would just hit save, publish one time, and that's it. From there, any change I make in Slater, I can just hit Command S to save to dev, or I can even go up here and say save to production. And then all I have to do is go and preview my page from Webflow and just refresh it every time I make a save to a code change in here. So it's this concept of like hot reloading. So every single time you're making an update in the code, you can come back and refresh and test. So that cycle of editing the code and coming back and testing is much, much, much faster doing it this way, which is candidly like it's very much closer to traditional development where you're working, and making code changes on a local environment. And so it's much more efficient than I would say the traditional, more manual way of making code changes or pasting them into Webflow and republishing every time. Hopefully that's helpful.
Wow. Okay. Recap needed, I feel. So you've got 17 different pages that you are using Slater for. So if we just go back to Slater, you see how Corey has made sure that rather than publishing the code globally across the whole site, he's essentially put that snippet, so copied the script, put that into each particular page. So every single one of those pages has different code on it, depending on where he wants that code to actually function. So that's a really, really helpful thing just to set the scene here for anyone that's like, wait, what am I looking at? I haven't yet looked at Slater before, but I kind of know what it's about. You can add code per page by just adding that little plus icon at the top left, and that will add that particular page. Now, another important thing to note here is that Corey knows how to code, but he's still using Slater to basically be this kind of master jiu-jitsu coder that's sat next to him, that's helping him work through problems. You may not get the perfect custom code straight away. I certainly don't. I mean, I need Slater way, way more than Corey does, but, Corey keeps prompting to actually get that code to work for him. So if you're not getting the perfect code straight away, keep prompting, keep talking to Slater, and you can test it super quickly. As Corey mentioned, super streamlined. Once you've pasted that script into your Webflow page or across the site globally, if you want that to be across the site globally, then you can test that super fast, which just means instead of the workflow of clicking save, publishing to your Webflow site, code not working, you don't know why because it's not, it doesn't actually explain where the errors are, then it's just a really, really helpful way of using custom code in your projects. I have never seen a more complex website, I think a more complex website full stop, that has involved so much Slater code, though. It's fascinating to see how much, per page you've used a lot of Slater to basically sew together Memberstack, Airtable, Zapier, WhaleSync. Like you've got a lot going on that's tying all of this together. I mean, in the grand scheme of lines of code, I guess it's not nearly as much than it could be. But
I think the way I look at it too is like, there are maybe even tools like, Bubble, for example, or candidly, even like Wizzed would be a good example of like that will abstract the need for custom code that a lot of this stuff does, a lot of the custom code that is in the site does. However, like the thing that I love about still doing it this way is that you have full access and control and creativity into specifically what you need to do with the code, right? And it could be a large variety of reasons. Again, most of them are things that we're not doing all in one go. They are things we were doing over time, right? Like even another one in here, I think this is my coworker Mike dropped this one in here, but also likely generated it from Slater. Is on the profile page, you can see there's like placeholders here where we're doing very simple things like adding, first name and last name directly from Memberstack. No custom code required. You just add an attribute and on load, it works. But there's other things like we wanted to capture pronouns, and the way we needed to capture them in the form was separate custom fields. And so we couldn't just only use the attributes for these. We wanted to be a little bit more specific in the way that those are shown. So, using things like that DOM package I mentioned, and more granularly controlling how we hide and show those, we could do that with JavaScript, and it really wasn't something that took a ton of time. Instead, it's just knowing what you want to do, maybe having a base understanding of like the general concepts of JavaScript in this case. Definitely goes a long way in terms of like knowing what to ask Slater. But in general, it's just those piece by piece by piece. And yeah, I love that we can even organize it this way. I think the other thing that it makes me think of is like before I used Slater, I would use VS Code and GitHub Copilot, which is still honestly a great AI companion tool. It works differently where the way you interact with the AI is via adding comments in your code that usually need to be a lot more specific on what you need to do. And then it will spit back chunks at a time. But it's not often like whole solutions like you get with ChatGPT or what Slater, is doing. And so I think that's where I still end up coming back and liking this workflow better. And then this page was one that I was like, maybe this is a simpler example for people to see, is like before October 5th on the homepage. It's probably still hidden in here. We had a countdown timer. How about this one? They're all just hidden. We had a countdown timer of when a countdown till conf. It's who doesn't love a good old countdown timer, right? But this is something that like I think my own code workflow, the thing I still rely on the most, for better or worse, is saving snippets. So Jack mentioned in the beginning, my hat is from No Code Supply Co. is a site that I run on the side with a friend and coworker Max. And a lot of the origin of this site was all this data that I had just stored in Notion, and a lot of which was this code snippets. It was like, oh, how do you do that one thing? And now I'm drawing a blank. I want to say this is in here. Yes, it is. So this exact snippet that we were using on the homepage to count down these numbers was something that I found or used or written at some point in the past. And my biggest tip here is like this, where it's like, don't necessarily think you have to just net new create it with AI. You can do that as well. But another huge value of AI and Slater in that is finding something that maybe works. So, okay, sweet, here's a script. And then I grabbed that. And then I think I initially probably just tried it directly on the page. But then one issue was that like some of these values, when it was less than 10, it would just be one digit. And so you can see the conversation I had in here was like, again, I just was like, hey, can you help me update the script below? So I pasted in the script after I finished writing it so that the numbers rendered are always 2 digits. For example, if the seconds is 7, it should be 07. And so it spit me back a result, which is, I believe, just the second one here. And it's like a very minute difference. It's this like pad start addition here, right? And I didn't remember or know that method in JavaScript existed. So simple. But AI does, and in split seconds, right? And so like, I think this is another huge learning lesson across all of these pages. While they look complex and maybe it looks overwhelming, so much of it was also just like understanding base concepts and then having AI help me update those scripts for my specific use case. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I just muted myself. Sorry. Killer advice.
All good.
Yeah, that all of this, any idea that you have as someone that's trying to do something in Webflow that might be hitting native walls, like someone has worked it out before you. So
totally.
So that's where I think if you are asking Slater for stuff and not quite finding the right answer, hey, there's this thing called Google. You can just search for anything in the world of human knowledge, and there's still Stack Overflow or whatever. You can get libraries directly from whichever library you want to use.
Yeah.
And then paste that in and then manipulate that code in Slater. So that's the other thing that I think is really worth highlighting there. Just like Corey said, if you may have code snippets in a huge Notion file, and you might just like pull them in, and then you can manipulate them. And that actually brings us very nicely onto something that we're working on. Corey's been involved with, and a few other people in the chat. Jeff and obviously Whit and Mason are in the chat too. We are working on a community library. So that is something that is very much in development, updates to come, but it's super exciting because that will mean that, if you guys have Notion file or, whatever, Google Sheets or whatever, where you store all this custom code, you can potentially put it into a kind of Wikipedia of all common use cases of custom code in Webflow websites, and drag and drop that in. So super excited for that to come together too. Corey's actually been a big reason why this is coming together. So massive thanks to you, Corey.
Absolutely. I mean, a thing I'd add there too is like one of the, maybe it's even two concepts of the same idea or thought, is that like from my own journey, one of the things that's helped me learn code the most, aside from like Webflow directly, because it relates to all the actual terminology and functionality of the web and HTML and CSS, is CodePen. And so if you haven't heard of CodePen before, it is, a little code playground where you can save snippets like that, and it shows a live preview of them running. And so that concept kind of coming to Slater, and then you have the AI functionality on top of it, is so exciting. Because like even still to this day, a lot of times if I'm looking for a solution, one of the ways I'll Google is like CodePen plus what my solution I'm looking for is, right? And so what's exciting is, Slater maybe even having a day of like a library or something like that as another source you can search through. And then the last other side of this that I would say is like, I know I preach the Webflow news all the time, but like to me, the value of Webflow as a product is so apparent with the handy addition of things like Slater, because Webflow allows you to work so closely with just JavaScript and CSS, the native browser languages. So the way that you sell that, I added those to pages, or the way that Slater lets you add and run those scripts even faster, is massive, because you have literally the entire web's knowledge of JavaScript and Stack Overflow articles and things to pull from, versus other tools that have a proprietary way of doing functionality or making updates or customizing. Those are limited. The help and resources and forums and knowledges are limited to that proprietary community and not beyond. Whereas with Webflow and doing a product or building a solution like I'm kind of showing today, since so much of it's still rooted in custom functionality being just raw JavaScript or jQuery, if you will, it's like there's so much knowledge out there that's just like a search away, or in this case, an AI prompt away. That is
a robot away. Yeah. And I think we've talked about this in a different call, but it's interesting with all these different no-code or low-code tools. This abstraction of code does mean that you come to brick walls if you are someone that's building something that's slightly more complex. Mm-hmm. And as much as no-code tools are incredible to enable people to build the internet that they want to see to a certain extent, it also means that naturally the more simplified you make things, the harder it is when you want to build something complex. And that's where I think Webflow have done such an amazing job of kind of leaning away from things that do simplify things kind of so far, so that it's literally drag and droppable. I'm not going to name any names, but we all know the big players out there that are trying to compete with Webflow in this space. Yep. And I think that's where having the Webflow app marketplace and all of these other things that are coming into the space with Chrome extensions and all sorts, and then for Slater to be able to give you the kind of the world's coding knowledge as well as being able to have a tool like Webflow just that we all know and love is pretty wild. So massive thanks to you, Corey, for just broader than this stream. Just thank you for doing everything that you do in the community and sharing so much with us all. No Code Supply is insane, so go check that out. There's already a lot of snippets in there. And when Corey drops his merch, anyone that's on this stream, go support. We did have a really good question that I think might be quite nice to end on, actually.
Love it.
So Corey, as in Flowman, he asked, where was it? I've lost it. How does a senior brand designer end up with being tasked to build this enormous back-end machine?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, this is what's interesting is like the brand, although I am a brand designer, our web team that I am on at the team at Webflow, we definitely need to have a more of a technical sense. If you go to my personal website, CoreyMoen.com, the banner is Webflow Tech Lead, and that is it is a title I am striving for even internally at Webflow, where the how does this happen is like I have found that one of the most valuable skills I can offer to the team or people I work with on the side is that combination of both technical and design. But in my opinion, which is very, very biased and very, of course, from my own and only my own, is like it's a rare and valuable combination solely because you can think and control both ends of the experience. At the end of the day, like we just want a really polished experience for our end customers. So of course that means design on the front end, but polish also means that data flows correctly and quickly and all of that. And so by having visibility into all that and even control, it's like, it's so fun, candidly, because like you don't have this like age-old development cycle of somebody designs it, throws it over the impervious wall, and and then they get it back and hope that it's right, and there's all this back and forth. Like for me, no code and Webflow has always been the knife that cuts that wall in half and lets like designers and developers work really closely, or maybe even people that like myself, that I'm titled a designer, but I mean, at the end of the day, I do a lot more front-end development anymore than, like, candidly, I always say internally, if there on any given day, I'd rather be in Webflow than in Figma, just because it's what I enjoy. So I think it's like, yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I think it's like, candidly, it's a bigger topic that I don't think the industry talks about enough. Like, this is a whole other rabbit hole. So I'm just going to say it and then I'm going to stop. Is like, I think front-end development, as it's always been titled, is now mid-end development. Like no longer are front-end developers actually doing front end. It's always like overlaced and interlaced with data and logic and all these things. So us as Webflow developers or no coders or whatever you want to call it, even designers with the technical ability, we almost need to come in and fill this gap, that is now left for the true front end. Yeah, so a talk for another time, but hopefully that is in any way an insight into like how little old designer me from Iowa ended up doing technical projects like this.
I like this idea of the true front end. What is a Webflower? I think that's essentially the kind of butt of the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like someone that does Webflow is probably aware of Whale Sync, Memberstack, Outsetter, Zapier, Make. There's all sorts of different tools that you're going to use, and then obviously if you're designing for a client, that starts with the design. So you're going to be using Figma and or Sketch, or maybe Adobe Illustrator if you're doing the brand identity as well, which I see a lot of Webflowers offer. Mm-hmm. And you are jack of all trades, master of none is better than a master of one. Did you guys know that is the full phrase? Because the amount of people that have said jack of all trades, master of none when I like fuck something up, I'm like, actually, the full phrase is jack of all trades, master of none is better than a master of one, which I think is you, Corey. Although I'd actually say you're kind of pretty maestro-ful of a lot of different bits and bobs.
The way I always think about it is there's this concept of a T shape of skills that you've maybe heard. Yeah, where it's like the T, the bar is you know a lot of things, but there's always maybe one or two that you go deep on, right? I don't know.
We need to do. I would love to organize another talk with you at some point. Maybe it should be an EA Live, because I don't know if this is as Slater related. But sure. Yes, what is a Webflow, and how should we be thinking about?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, how should we think about positioning Webflow maybe off the back of that? Anyway, we are going to talk for hours, and people are going to start dropping off the stream as they fall asleep. Well, hopefully it's not too boring. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up there, is what I'm trying to say. Corey, as always, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you. You always bring energy, bring that smile, and bring a ton of knowledge, and some, make me really think about my own tech stack, maybe what I need to be thinking about if I'm actually doing I mean, I'm thinking about Webflow and referral schemes, and Airtable, and how this relates to all my projects. I'm sure everyone else who's in the chat and has watched this stream is thinking the same thing. Like Banner Bear, I saw Jeff talk about that. He was like, "Oh, Banner Bear, interesting," and talking about Airtable. It's all great stuff. So thank you. And I'm sure that Slater merch will be on its way to you. If you don't have any, do you have?
Yeah. I got my bundle. We're good.
You got a mug as well.
Oh, yes, I did. I don't have it with me at the moment, but yeah.
How dare you?
Thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here. If anybody has questions, comments, whatever, please reach out. Either CoreyMoen.com, submit the form. Twitter is probably the social I'm most active on. I think it's at Corey G. Moen. Yeah, look me up. I love to banter and rant about all these nerdy things. So, yeah, I will see you all online.
Yes, and just final question before you go. Pablo Cortez said, what is the other stream you are doing? I think he might be referring to the other stream that you're doing in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Why don't we put that in the chat just to plug that? Because I think we've got some Corey super fans.
It is with Josh Fafelski, I think is how you say his name.
Yes,
and
FinSuite team, from Wiz team.
He was on the Black Peak team, and they do a lot of Wiz stuff. And he's starting his own thing called Mover. And so yeah, he wants to get like a podcast, that kind of thing going. So look him up, or movercreative.com is the website where I think the episode will be highlighted. So yes, more to come there.
Okay, awesome. So that is, I'll just find his Twitter just in case anyone's interested.
Yeah.
Lovely guy.
It's at hey_FIFE. Fife.
Okay, that's why I couldn't find it. I was like, it's like
I didn't connect my YouTube account or Google account so I can't chat. But yeah.
Okay, that's all good. Well, we've put his Twitter in there. This is Josh's. So guys, follow his Twitter. I'm sure he'll be posting about the talk with Corey to come. Corey, I've taken an hour and 10 of your time. Appreciate you dearly. Everyone in this chat does, I know, and I'm super excited for the community library to come together. So, maybe Corey will have his own library within the community library. Without a doubt. Who knows? Maybe you'll be able to read some of this code a little bit more closely, because I know we skimmed through a lot of, the fine detail today. But yeah, thanks so much, Corey. Thanks so much for everyone in the chat. Keep going back to these streams, keep asking questions. Message Corey if you have any questions. If you are not in the Slater Slack community, where the hell are you? That's where the party continues. So join that. If you want a link for that, DM me, Slater_app. Okay, all the plugs done. We're going to end the stream there. Appreciate you all tremendously. Goodbye.
Later, y'all.